Episode 29, Zion's Camp Marches. Welcome back to Hidden and Distorted History of the Church, where we uncover the lesser-known truths about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons. My goal is to reveal the authentic historical facts behind the Mormon Church. Recap. In our last episode, we unearthed Oliver Cowdery's deliberate omission of the first vision and Moroni's pivotal visitations to Joseph Smith in 1820 and 1823. We also dissected Professor Charles Anthon's emphatic public rejection of the Book of Mormon, examined Isaac Hale's damning affidavit, and analyzed the chaotic dissolution of the United Order. In this episode, we delve into the tumultuous saga of Zion's Camp, uncovering the outrageous claims that emerged during this pivotal moment. We'll also examine Joseph Smith Jr.'s controversial decision to name his son Joseph III as the church's next leader, and the formation of the so-called Quorum of the 12 Fraudsters. Prepare for a riveting exploration of leadership, ambition, and the dark undercurrents of early Mormon history. Part 1, Zion's Camp Ego, a military march of failures. Zion's Camp is one of the more grandiose yet glaring failures in Joseph Smith's early career. Masked under the guise of spiritual purpose, it was a reckless expedition deeply entangled with Smith's inflated vision of reclaiming land in Jackson County, Missouri. Despite the facade of a divine mission, the reality is undeniable. Zion's Camp was a debacle of poor planning, dismal leadership, and misguided strategy. Let's take a step back to 1833 when tensions in Jackson County erupted. The Mormons, believing this land to be Zion, God's designated refuge for the saints, found themselves in a violent clash with locals who were less than thrilled about their rapid invasion and peculiar religious practices. In the end, they were expelled. Instead of addressing the complexities of the situation, Joseph saw an opportunity to assert his power. On May 4, 1834, Zion's Camp was launched. Armed with faith, muskets, and a dangerously misplaced sense of divine entitlement, Smith rallied 207 men to march over 1,000 miles to Missouri, believing they would reclaim their land. The result? Nothing short of a humiliating disaster. Smith's leadership failed on multiple fronts. His inability to negotiate with officials, his misreading of the situation, and the fact that disease ravaged his troops all pointed to one conclusion: Joseph was out of his depth. Instead of a moral victory, his followers were rewarded with suffering and disappointment. Fair LDS, as expected, spins this catastrophe into a trial of faith, claiming that the failed mission was never about military triumph, but about weeding out the unfaithful. They argue that Zion's Camp was divinely orchestrated to forge future leaders like Brigham Young. But let's be honest, this was no grand test. It was an ego-driven disaster that left Smith's credibility tarnished and his followers disillusioned. Part 2, Zelf the What, a convenient discovery to fit the narrative. During Zion's Camp, Joseph stumbled upon the remains of a supposed ancient warrior named Zelf, buried in a mound near the Illinois River. Smith declared, without hesitation, that these were the bones of a Nephite warrior who died fighting in the mythical wars of the Book of Mormon. This so-called revelation further entrenched the idea that North America was the battleground for the Nephite-Lamanite Wars. Why is this important? Because Joseph's narrative now tied ancient Book of Mormon geography to the very land they were marching through, creating a direct connection between Zion's Camp and the supposed Nephite Wars. But here's the problem. Joseph had already claimed that the final battles of the Nephites occurred near the hill Cumorah in New York. So which is it, Joseph? Was it in New York, or are we now rewriting geography to suit the situation at hand? Fair LDS predictably downplays the Zelf story, calling it symbolic rather than doctrinal. But let's face it, Joseph was trying to make a bold statement about the land his followers were traversing, reinforcing the shaky foundations of his theology. The contradictions in geography revealed just how fluid Joseph's revelations really were, conveniently adjusting to the moment but ultimately falling apart under scrutiny. Part 3. The utter failure of Zion's Camp. When Zion's Camp neared Missouri, Joseph was banking on Governor Dunklin's promise to help reinstate the Mormons to their land. But Dunklin, witnessing an armed militia approaching, wisely backed away from that commitment. Zion's Camp was anything but peaceful. Armed to the teeth and preparing for battle, they arrived as an intimidating force, not a humble group seeking negotiation. Dunklin, not wanting to fan the flames of conflict, pulled out any support, and Zion's camp was left stranded. No allies, no plan, and no hope. Joseph's response? Blame his followers for their lack of faith. He chastised them for their supposed spiritual weakness, never once taking responsibility for his disastrous leadership. In classic Smith fashion, he reframed the entire failed mission as a divine test, claiming that Zion's camp wasn't about retaking land, but testing the faith of his followers. Fair LDS would have you believe that this was a spiritual triumph, a test of faith, designed to prepare future leaders. But the facts tell a different story. It was a logistical, strategic, and spiritual failure that exposed Joseph's weaknesses. His grand promises went unfulfilled, and many of his followers returned home disillusioned, with their faith shaken to the core. Part 4. Discontent and a Failed Prophecy. The failure of Zion's camp didn't just end with the immediate disbandment. Joseph doubled down, prophesying that the saints would reclaim Jackson County by September 11, 1836. And surprise, this too never came to pass. No battle was fought, no land was reclaimed, and Smith's prophetic credibility was further damaged. The church likes to paint Zion's camp as the forge that shaped its future leaders, but in reality, it sowed the seeds of dissent and left many questioning Joseph's divine authority. Those who point to its failure aren't missing the long-term spiritual impact. They're just recognizing that sometimes a failure is just a failure. No divine test, no greater purpose, just an inflated ego leading followers to ruin. Part 5. Joseph Smith III, the heir that never was. In 1834, Joseph Smith reportedly blessed his 2-year-old son, Joseph Smith III, as his chosen successor. This moment is key in understanding the eventual succession crisis after Smith's death in 1844. Smith III was named as the rightful heir to the church's leadership, a fact upheld by the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, RLDS, now Community of Christ. However, the majority of Latter-day Saints followed Brigham Young westward, splintering the movement and leaving Joseph's family behind. The RLDS would later argue that this blessing was proof that Joseph Jr. intended for his son to lead, not Brigham Young. This family-based claim of legitimacy remains central to the RLDS tradition, and it stands in stark contrast to the mainstream LDS Church, which roots its leadership authority in the Quorum of the 12. Part 6. The Quorum of the 12, second fiddle to Smith's inner circle. In 1835, the Quorum of the 12 Apostles was formally established, yet it's crucial to recognize that they did not wield the immense power they hold today. Initially, their mission was to serve as special witnesses and to spread the gospel across the globe, but they were far from the church's highest authority. That distinction belonged solely to Joseph Smith and his first presidency. At that time, the 12 often operated under the shadow of the High Council, which was the church's original governing body. It wasn't until after Joseph's death and Brigham Young's ascent to leadership that the Quorum of the 12 transformed into the dominant authority we see today. Prior to this shift, their role was largely symbolic and supportive, primarily executing the directives of Joseph Smith and his inner circle. Joseph Smith opened the historic meeting by proclaiming, "Let the 3 witnesses of the Book of Mormon pray," and then proceed to choose 12 men from the church as apostles to go forth to all nations, kindreds, tongues, and peoples. Following this sacred invocation, the 3 witnesses offered fervent prayers, receiving blessings through the laying on of hands from the first presidency. United in purpose, they set out to fulfill a previously supposed divine command by selecting the 12. Among those present on February 14, 1835, was Heber C. Kimball, a veteran of Zion's camp, who would later emphasize the day's significance. This was the day appointed for choosing. The 3 witnesses called forth individuals revealed to them by divine inspiration, confirming their selections with profound certainty. Joseph Smith had previously reviewed the names, and those chosen for the first Quorum of the 12 Apostles in this dispensation included Lyman Johnson, Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Orson Hyde, David W. Patton, Luke Johnson, William E. McClellan, John F. Boynton, Orson Pratt, William Smith, Thomas B. Marsh, and Parley P. Pratt. During this inaugural meeting, Lyman Johnson, Brigham Young, and Heber C. Kimball were ordained by the three witnesses. The following day, on Sunday, Oliver Cowdery called forth Orson Hyde, David W. Patton, and Luke Johnson for their ordination. Later that same day, William E. McClellan, John F. Boynton, and William Smith received their ordinations. On February 21st, Joseph Smith, David Whitmer, and Oliver Cowdery ordained Parley P. Pratt, solidifying the new quorum. Latter-day Saint historians assert that the first quorum of the 70 was largely composed of veterans from Zion's camp. The history of the church lists 41 members from Zion's camp as part of the original quorum, while Joseph Young, the senior president of the quorum, adds 29 names not included earlier. When these records are combined, an impressive 67 members of the first quorum had marched with Zion's camp, with Jesse Huntsman, William D. Pratt, and Jesse B. Smith as notable exceptions. With the first quorum and their presidency firmly established, Joseph Smith articulated the pivotal role these leaders would play in the kingdom of God. If the first 70 are all employed, and there is a call for more laborers, he declared, it will be the duty of the 7 presidents of the first 70 to call and ordain others and send them forth into the vineyard, until, if necessary, they set apart 7 times 70, and even until there are 144,000 thus designated for the ministry. He underscored the authority of the presidency to choose, ordain, and set apart from among the most experienced elders of the church additional 70s and special witnesses of Christ, thereby establishing their foundational role in the rapidly expanding church. Conclusion: this is a tale of failures, false promises, and fractured leadership. Zion's camp was far from the spiritual triumph the church claims. It was a misguided march driven by ambition, leading followers into disease, disillusionment, and death under the guise of divine command. With Joseph Smith III receiving a blessing to lead the church, the deep fractures within the organization became evident, highlighting a legacy of power struggles and unfulfilled promises that challenge its foundational claim. Please watch for future videos, and thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for the day.